Good morning and welcome to the digital service for Bayham United Church on this, the first day of August. Each Sunday in August will be unique, and I hope you will join us to discover what we have in store for you. I'm a storyteller at heart, so today's service is a special story. A story about family. Like all good stories, the facts behind this story are true, and what makes it interesting for me is that it is about my family. It could, however, be the story of many families that came to this area years ago. The story is about a birthday party, the 70th birthday of my great-great-great-grandfather Samuel. The year is 1861. The location is the home of Samuel's son Henry on Tollgate Road between Straffordville and Eden. Many of Samuel's extended family have gathered for the occasion, and Samuel has consented to recount his past to the group. You have to help me out here. You will have to imagine me about a foot shorter and blessed with bushy gray sideburns and a mustache, because I will play the part of Samuel as he talks. Sit down, sit down. Make room for the little ones up front. Goodness, Henry, I think you're going to have to build a bigger house. Now, I don't know why, but you children are always bugging me about my time in the War of 1812. I know I don't talk about it much, but that's because not all the memories are good ones. Dad and Mother brought the family north to Gainsborough Township in the Niagara area. We were United Empire Loyalists. We had to leave New Jersey when it became more and more difficult to live with neighbors that were suspicious of our loyalties to the British. Dad settled us on a good chunk of land, but as the fifth of 11 children, it soon became obvious to me that I needed a place of my own. When I started courting your Grandma Rebecca of the Bugners over in Lion's Head, the desire for land was even stronger. So when I heard that the Crown was offering land in exchange for service in the war, I jumped at the chance and joined the 2nd Lincoln Militia. I don't think I really thought too hard about what I was getting into. I had hunted all my life, was a fair shot, could reload on the run, and that was all the recruiters were interested in. The war wasn't very real to us at that time. There'd been a battle at Detroit, but I was stationed near Queenston, and everything seemed relatively quiet. The rumor was that the Americans were going to attack Fort George, but everything changed on the night of October 12, 1812. The Americans snuck up the cliffs of the Niagara Gorge and established a position at the top of Queenston Heights. They had to be driven out. To do that, we would have to charge straight up that hill. And I was going to be in the thick of it. Now you might ask, were you scared, Grandpa? To answer that, I have to go back and tell you another story. Over the years, the families got together, and you may have met many of my brothers and sisters. However, no one has seen my oldest brother, Cornelius, for decades. When the war was brewing, he was openly sympathetic to the Yankees, and he was finally charged with treason at the court at Dundas and kicked out of the country. I never understood it completely, but I think it was hard for Cornelius when we moved north. I was so young I barely remember it, but he was 13 and he was angry at Dad for moving us. He had friends back there, and had got caught up in stories they told about the evil British. Also, there was Susie Appleby from the town of Log Jail, New Jersey, where we had lived. Even before we left, he had his eye on her and had traveled south to visit before the war broke out. Apparently, if you saw her, you might think of changing sides too. Now, don't give me that look, Rebecca. You know it's true. Anyway, boy, was Dad mad. I never understood why he was such a staunch loyalist. We certainly had no love, great love for King George, but he told me once, Samuel, a nation born in violence will always think that violence is the solution. I didn't really understand when he told me, but maybe he was right. So we didn't want anything to do with Cornelius from that moment on. For Mother, it was not so simple. He was her oldest child after all, and she couldn't just let go. She secretly wrote letters and tried to stay in touch. And that was how we heard the rumor that he had went with Susie's brother and joined the American militia. Which brings me back to the bottom of that hill at Queenston. 21 years old, never fired a gun at a person before, let alone been in battle. As we formed up, I should have been scared to death, but all I could think of was, dear God, don't let Cornelius be at the top of that hill. It turns out that the Yankee regulars had been recruiting farmers into the militia by claiming the British were invading and were going to take their farms. When the militia realized that it was the Americans that were crossing the river, they went back home. So I never knew if Cornelius was with them or not. I was soon snapped back to reality, though. Although we were well out of range, the crazy Yankees at the top of the hill started firing. Musket balls were ricocheting off rocks all around us. Tommy Sparling, an old friend from Jersey, was right beside me when one caught him in the knee. He went down screaming in pain, and the situation became very, very real to me. An old British sergeant major kept screaming at us to hold our fire until we all felt like shooting him. The order to advance sounded, and we started up the hill. At that moment, General Brock and the British regulars charged up the slope right among us. Boy, that was a sight to see. Brock was on a magnificent black horse bred for war. As he passed us with the horse lunging over the rocks, he shouted, "To the top, boys, to the top!" Now there was a man you could follow into battle. I always said that it was that horse that got him killed. The animal had no fear, and soon Brock was well out in front of us. In a volley of gunfire, he pitched backwards off the horse. Some of the boys thought he might be all right, but I could tell he was dead. The charge stalled, and there we were, almost to the top, but pinned down by constant firing. As I tried to huddle behind a rock too small to cover me, I was terrified. Two things saved us that day. The British regulars reformed under new command and started forward again. Us farmers had always made fun of the regulars in their bright red uniforms and straight lines. We called them scarlet target practice. But to an enemy facing them, to see them just keep coming, row after row, is a little unnerving. And to us, well, it puts some steel in your spine when they go by. The second thing that turned the tide for us were the Mohawk warriors that were on our flanks that day. They melted like ghosts in and out of the trees on the hillside. And for whatever reason, the American regulars were more afraid of them than they were of us. With a final push, we were over the top, and the Yankees, pinned with their backs to the gorge, surrendered. What a wash of emotion. Relief that it was over. Grief over those killed and injured. Plain old exhaustion. The next weeks were a blur. We attended Brock's funeral, but there was little real action until the Battle of Lundy's Lane on the 25th of July. I always thought old man Lundy would be pleased to have his name in the history books. Dad had told many stories about him from the time he brought his family north with ours. The battle, however, was nothing to be pleased about. We would push the Americans back, only to have the British call a halt. Then we would lose that ground. This went on all day until we were sick of the bloodshed and lack of leadership. Finally, a stalemate was declared, and the Americans went back across the river. My fellow militiamen and I collapsed on the field, exhausted and just glad to be alive. That would be the end of the war for me. Although it drug on in other sectors, our militia was disbanded. I went straight home and proposed to your grandma. Lucky for me, she accepted, and while we were very happy, we couldn't help but be impatient for my land to be declared official. We were married the next year and blessed with our first child, William. Finally, the grant came through in 1817. I took it as a good omen when I heard that my land was east of Eden. And that's when trouble started. I never owned a horse, but Rebecca had just assumed that her dad would lend me one to travel to our land. But Mr. Bugner had never really approved of me, just a farmer fleeing the States with Irish in his ancestry. He had hoped a British officer would catch your grandma's eye. That was a hard day. Heading out on foot, leaving Rebecca and little William behind, and Rebecca so furious with her dad, she wouldn't speak. My luck improved after I reached Colonel Talbot's trail heading east. As I crossed the Grand River on the barge at Dunville, I struck up a conversation with an old trader. He had a mule cart loaded with barrels of salted meat, and in no time I was perched on the seat beside him. He was glad for the conversation, and I was happy to be riding. He took me all the way to Simcoe, and then I was back on foot. Anticipation made the journey light, and a few days later, there I was at the toll gate just east of Sandytown. I turned north looking for the Little Otter Creek. I crested a knoll, and there was my land. You should have seen it, kids. Pine trees 200 feet tall, meadow of grass as high as your head, groves of giant oak, maple, chestnut, and cherry, and the soil boys, the soil. Forget that old clay loam and rocks of Lincoln County. This was rich sand that was easy to work and would grow almost anything. But I had no time to dally with sightseeing. I found a pine tree that had tipped out, revealing a nice cubbyhole under the massive roots. I lined it with hemlock boughs and wood shavings, and that was my home for months. Now, I know that my brother Daniel over there started a story about that refuge of mine. He claimed that I shot a 1,000-pound grizzly that fall. First, there's no grizzlies around here. It was a black bear. Second, it was more like 200 pounds, not 1,000, but you know how these stories grow. When I think back, it was exciting for a minute there. I had just got comfortable one night, and that bear stuck his head right in. I didn't know which of us was more startled. I grabbed my gun and shot him right away. But I felt sorry for him. He was just looking for a place to hole up for the winter. But I was grateful that he had come along. As a cold set in, that thick hide kept me warm for many nights. But mostly I remember the work. The Hubbard family that owned the hotel in Sandytown built a sawmill just upstream of me several years later, which came in very handy as the farm expanded. But that first winter, I felled trees and had the logs taken to Vienna. The tall pines were in especially high demand in Port Burrell to be made into masts at the shipyard there. By the next spring, I had built a log cabin, cleared a little land to start growing crops, and had enough money to go to Tillsonburg and buy a horse and wagon. The happiest moment of my life was driving that rig into the yard at my father-in-law's farm and seeing Rebecca and little William. We loaded up, drove back to our farm, and now, all these years later, here we are, all together. That's what you need to remember. We are family. We have to look out for one another, from the biggest to the littlest. I don't want any of you to ever have to go through the worry that I did at the bottom of that hill so long ago. Now you'll have to run along because I need a nap. That was the last birthday party for Samuel. No, not because he passed away. He had many more birthdays, but 2 years later, his beloved Rebecca caught pneumonia and died. He said he just didn't feel like celebrating without her. Those relatives must have been listening to him that day, though. When he finally died at the age of 92, there were 18 farms in the surrounding townships owned by sons, grandsons, brothers, nephews, and cousins. My message to you today is the same as Samuel's all those years ago. Stay connected. Stay informed. If you have a brother, sister, friend, or neighbor that you haven't talked to lately, reach out. As Samuel said, we are family. Our immediate family, our congregation family, or our community family. It doesn't matter. I hope you've enjoyed my little tale, but I must apologize to all of you who are looking forward to hearing Courtney sing. Believe me, I understand. I do too. So to make it up to you, next Sunday, we will have extra songs, including a guest performance by Bonnie Rokas playing with Courtney. Stay tuned. Now I would like to pray with you, folks. Dear Lord, this is a prayer of gratitude. We are grateful for family in all its many forms. This is a prayer of hope. Hope that we can all, no matter our differences, understand that we are not all the same and it does not matter. That means listening, really hearing what the other person is saying. That means staying connected in the real sense of the word. This is a prayer from the heart, from the Spirit that connects us all. We pray as you taught us, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Now I invite you all to go out and make the most of this coming week. Enjoy your day.